Welcome to Two Guys and a Question podcast. Today, Alan and Danny dive into one of the biggest misconceptions in our profession: is funeral service optional? Listen to their bold insights, stories, and strategies. If you believe in the power of compassion, flexibility, and skill, then this episode is for you. Let's listen.
I'm Alan Creedy.
I'm Danny Jefferson.
And we're Two Guys and a Question. And Danny, you just brought me a brochure for a continuing education program. What this did, as I was reading the brochure, I thought to myself, this is telling me something. And what it's telling me is that the profession at the association level and speaker level and so on, they're talking about the right things, but in the wrong way.
The title is Funeral Service Optional.
Actually, a statement is funeral service is optional.
Yeah. They don't have the word is in it. Funeral service optional.
And what my preference would be to say, we need to challenge ourselves right now with the question, is funeral service optional?
And I agree with that. Here's the thing that I struggle with anyone giving a conference, speaking to people, sharing ideas that isn't positive. That I thought that was negative in a lot of ways.
Well, I'll tell you a story on that. This goes back many years. I was very active in various organizations in funeral service and would attend many seminars, conferences, and the conventions and whatnot. I realized over a period of time that many of the talking heads, the pundits in funeral service, they spoke to funeral service audiences in what I perceived as somewhat of an insulting way. They talked down to them. They told them that if they didn't change their ways, the sky would fall in. And,
I remember that.
Yeah. Well, that was normal. That was not one or just a couple. That was pretty much all of them. And I finally was talking to a pretty smart friend of mine one day, and I said, I just don't get it. I would never talk to people that way. And my friend said, what you don't realize, Alan, is that everybody in the audience agrees with them. They just don't realize they're talking about them. And it really shook me up. And so what you and I have been focused on and what we would prefer our audience focus on is, okay, these things are happening. Cremation is increasing. Okay, tell me something I didn't know. Services are declining. I'm not sure that's true. Some people are experiencing that. We ought to ask the question, why are some people experiencing a decline in services and others are not?
I'll give you an example of that, Alan.
Okay.
Some funeral homes will help families have a meal. They'll have a celebration.
Right.
They'll have a service somewhere else. I remember speaking to a funeral home that I was actually speaking to about my mom. There was a gazebo outside of the nursing facility.
Right.
And I asked them, could we have a service outside of that gazebo? Nobody's going to be there. First off, I was disappointed that the funeral home didn't even know that the nursing facility was there.
Yes, that's right.
Second off, they didn't offer, well, let me call someone there and see if we can have it at the gazebo.
Yeah.
She just immediately said no.
Yeah. That
was not good. In the professional services, when we are speaking to people, no is never an answer.
You know, here's a way of dealing with that. I've got a suggestion. Now, sometimes no is an answer, Danny. You know that.
Yeah, but we're talking generally.
But most of the time, it should be the last answer. All right. So I set up a situation. I strongly objected to, and it's not a bad word. It's not a four-letter word, but strongly objected to a word describing what you do with funeral homes. And I asked you to replace it to skills development. Okay. And you said, okay, from now on, every time I use that word, I have to pay you $1. And I've got $2 bills on my desk. I keep them right there. They've been there for weeks. And maybe what we should do, if I were a funeral home owner, maybe what I should do is every time you say no to a family, you put $1 in the jar.
Alan, I'm going to tell our listening audience that if a family ever said, could we have a gazebo service out there under the gazebo outside the nursing facility, that your response might be, that's a great idea. How do you see that service happening?
Okay, so what have you done there?
I reversed it and let them tell me.
No, you've sent a signal, and the signal is I'm flexible.
Sure. But the whole thing is, whenever you get in a situation where you want to say no, always ask a question. It should be a
Great
trigger
advice. Yes.
for you to ask a question in the next sentence that comes out of your mouth.
Okay.
What do you mean by that? Would have been a good one. Do you think the nursing home would allow us to use the gazebo? Would have been a good one.
Or how about this? How do you envision that?
And that's just what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Would you want your mom present in full body there
Yeah.
and cremate her later?
Yeah.
Things like that. So these are the things that we do when we work with clients.
You know what you're
And
doing?
we have fun. We do role
Yeah.
playing. We just ask a question and I ask another one back. It's just fun.
It is fun, and it's a skill development. Most funeral directors have the skill, and it just needs to be developed. But you know what you were just doing? It just reminded me. And if you haven't figured this out, folks, Danny and I have gotten caught up in this AI trend, and we've been using it a lot. And what Danny was just doing right there was prompting.
Exactly.
You were prompting the consumer to create a picture. You know, you did this. I need to remind you, or the audience, when you were making arrangements, you often created pictures. So one of the best ones I thought was you call it an ossuary, I call it an urn arc.
Right.
But you introduced that in a way that they would visualize their grandchildren carrying that in.
Because I would ask them, so who is going to bring your dad into the chapel for the service?
Exactly. Instead of saying, we could use this device, you created a visual. And that's a skill set. That's a skill that can be developed.
Here's what most people don't realize either. If you're listening, you need to understand that the people that want to do that are always the grandkids.
Oh, absolutely. They love it.
They want to be a part of it. They
Yeah.
want to do something. And the older people, the grandpa, grandma, and the kids of the deceased all feel like that the grandkids should be sheltered when they, in fact, are curious, when they, in fact, want to be supportive. They want to help. They are hurting too.
We know, isn't it interesting that we know these things, but because of the profession's predisposition to not making waves, we don't tell them. We don't say, you know, I understand how you feel. The truth of the matter is, in our experience, very often, if you'll ask your grandkids if they would like to participate, they will be
Eager.
in saying yes.
Very eager.
But that's just a simple statement. The family can reject you or whatever, but is that not the truth?
What else is sad is that most funeral directors are going to answer that question when someone says, could we have it at the gazebo outside the nursing home? What are you going to do if it rains?
The gazebo has a roof.
I understand. Those people that may be sitting outside of the gazebo. The whole point is that instead of trying to figure out ways not to do it, try to help families with the way they want to do it.
You know, Danny, I had an attitude when I was running the funeral home back in the 80s. Average sale at the time, I remember very clearly, was around $5,000.
Which was high in those days. People
Yeah, it
may
was a
not
high
think
average.
that's high right
It was
now.
it was a high average.
Yeah.
It was a high average, but you could get a really nice car for less than $10,000 in those days. So, at any rate, that's not my point. My point was that somehow, without anybody coaching me or whatever, I thought to myself, for $5,000, we should be willing to inconvenience ourselves. And I understand why. I know where this came from. It's about the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen the next day. But for $5,000, for today's average sale in most areas is about $6,000, cremation being probably about 40% of that. No, well, never mind. I won't get into the finance of it. But my point being is that what our clients and others are realizing is the more flexible they are, the more assertive they are in the arrangements conference, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that in a minute, they have a very positive impact on the family, but they also have a positive impact on themselves and their business. They actually find their career to be more fulfilling because people do appreciate what they're doing. So let me talk to you about being assertive, all right?
The funeral service being optional is the thing that bothered me about that the most is this. Instead of talking about how funeral service is optional, tell me how I might lead a family to water, so to speak, by offering anything else after the cremation has been taken place. If the family insists on cremation, no, I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem if they don't want to do anything. And worse yet, if they don't want to do it with me, meaning, well, we've got a church, we'll just have it there and not involve me. I would always involve myself with it in the sense that who is going to seat the family? And then when I say
this gets back to being assertive, Danny, and it gets back to understanding what your value is. A lot of funeral directors don't understand their own value, and yet they have that value. If we really believed all this research and conclusions and seminars on grief and grief support and the value of the funeral and viewing and so on and so forth, if we really, really, really believed that, we would never say funeral service is optional. We would believe in our hearts the funeral service is not optional. And here's what, and I know that people are kind of reeling hearing me say that, but here's why I say that. If we look at human history, dating back prehistoric times to the present, we did not make this up. Some advertising executive on Madison Avenue did not make up funeral service. It was a natural development. And, I was watching a biblical archaeology thing on YouTube the other day, and I realized that I knew this, but I'd forgotten it, is that the Egyptians were embalming bodies 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So that didn't come out of the blue. So there has to be a necessity to this whole process, and we can go into details, but we don't need to. What we have to do is say in our heart, this is what we believe, and we have to have the commercial courage to stand up, and this is what your skills development is about, is you can be assertive without being overwhelming. You can be helpful without being dominating.
Funeral service is not optional. It needs to be standard. You can do it.
And we can help.
Wow, that was a lot of information, and thank you for listening to the latest episode of Two Guys and a Question. You can get your question answered by sending it to info@twoguysandaquestion.com. And remember, you can do it, and they can help.